So you mentioned like technical versus a GRC role. Would you say that it's like so you should choose which side you want to go, right? If you're a technical person, you go the technical route, and then if you're more of a people's person, you go the
Yeah, I think it depends. Like, I would say that, if you're the beginning of your career and you haven't actually had a security role yet, don't be like, I have to do this specific one thing and that's it, Be willing to try anything. But at the same time, I definitely feel that there's a different temperament of people, or maybe personality types, that gravitate to those different areas. Because some people don't want to be writing reports or doing presentations or speaking in front of people or going out to like three different companies throughout the day. They want a consistent schedule. They want to be able to work from home every single day, and they want to be able to do remote work all the time, and things like that. So I think it really depends on your personality and temperament. Um, I think there's definitely pros and cons to both GRC and pen testing. I wrote some of them down. Let me just have a quick look. 2 secs. I think for GRC, it's definitely easier to get into than, say, pen testing, for example, or technical.
That's interesting.
I would say that your ability to be upskilled into a role straight away is a lot faster. There's more roles. I mean, in Australia, for example, on Seek, I've looked at the data. There's more roles for GRC than there are for pen testing, for entry-level jobs. And that's because it is more oriented to being as a part of a business. The communication skills, the routine, the way that you operate in that role, it's a lot easier to kind of fit that person into any organization because it's more business-like. I think that if you want to work with people more than computers, then GRC might be a better option for you. But I guess some of the cons of GRC is that report writing can be boring. Even though I've done it for quite a while, I do enjoy it. But I mean, sometimes a report is boring, and that's just a reality, depending on the customer and the complexity of the environment and things like that. I would say that GRC is also further away from the threat or the action, because you're kind of more dealing with sometimes even conceptual scenarios, performing, interviewing people and things like that. You're not so much, configuring a firewall or, looking at a detection or an alert in a SOC. You're a little bit further away from the actual attacker or a real cybersecurity threat. And sometimes GRC, depending on what you do, can be a bit of a tick box and not really, actually trying to change an organization for the better. I prefer the GR side of GRC, being governance and risk management. For me, compliance is important, but I don't like doing auditing and things like that. And that's where sometimes it can become a little bit of a tick box with like IT general controls, audits, and things like that. But for like technical, like pen testing or SOC, I think it's there is minimal report writing. Like for you guys, it's 1 day out of 5 roughly. Definitely, some of the pros is that it's closer to a real attack or threat. You're really simulating what an attacker would be doing in terms of targeting a network. And there's kind of an infinite ceiling point for learning. There's not really a point where you know everything, because as you grow in your role, you'll learn new things, but also the world will change as well. But in terms of cons, though, there's definitely a high barrier of entry. For example, GRC, we can take someone that has 1 year of experience, self-study, and have them operate in their role successfully within 3 months. It's not the same for like being a digital forensics or a penetration tester. Having 3 years of IT experience or a degree or 1 year of extremely motivated self-study with OSCP or something like that will be what you need to get your first role in one of those kind of teams. But I would say for pen testing, well, one of the cons might be as well, from a consulting perspective, it can be a little bit rinse and repeat. Sometimes if you get stuck just doing one type of test, like web apps only, you might get sick of it and things like that. And also sometimes pen testing can also just be for a tick box as well. Often for example, that a client will come back a year later, you do the same test, and you send the same findings again, and they haven't remediated any of them. They just want the report so they can show that they've met the requirement and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be a bit of a frustration sometimes. Yeah, so you mentioned temperament, and also it's easier, like more jobs available for GRC. So
Mm.
perhaps something people should consider is just being more flexible. Like if they want to get into cyber, consider different options, like different routes to get into cyber. And actually, you can move around quite easily, I think, once
Absolutely.
you get your foot in the door. So you may get into a GRC role and then you want to move to pen testing or whatever, like 6 months or a year down the line. That's actually a pretty simple, like relatively simple move compared to you're just not in the industry at
Exactly
all, right?
right. Yeah, you've proved your value. You know, if you have been able to get a cybersecurity role and done it for a year, whether it's GRC or something like that, and then you want to pivot into a SOC analyst, it's 1,000 times easier than trying to go from the other way around.
But I think if you go a bit too deep into the management route, then would you say it's a bit harder to come back to a technical role?
It depends on the person. It really comes down to your own expectations. You know, for example, right now, for me, if I wanted to be a pen tester, I absolutely could, but I have to be willing to understand that, you know, I've got 5 years of experience in another domain. If I want to go into a pen testing role, I'm going to have to take a huge salary cut, and that's basically it. It's about your own expectations. I mean, is it easy to move between those roles? Absolutely, but you just have to manage your own expectations. You're not going to be expecting the same salary or benefits if you're going from 5 years in one domain to zero in another, or one in another. That's the
Mm.
only thing that really stops people from doing those changes, is they get accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and also they're probably more comfortable in their role. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess after you've done it for like 5 years or something, it's a bit hard to like jump into a completely new field and just like go back to level one again, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person. Like, some people might be able to find a role that's a combination that's a bit more technical and management. You know what I mean? But in some circumstances, if you want to change from, I don't know, let's say you're, and I think for GRC to pen testing, it's probably the hardest jump, because GRC is more management, business oriented, and risk management oriented, and pen testing is extremely deep and technical. Whereas if you were a network engineer for 5 years and you wanted to be a pen tester, that would be an extremely easier transition. You wouldn't have to take as much of a salary cut or anything like that, if any, because your skills are very transferable. Whereas from GRC to like pen testing, there's not as many transferable skills. From a consulting perspective, there would be, in terms of like how you manage a project, how you speak to customers, and all that sort of stuff, and how you control a scope. But when it comes to actually doing a role like pen testing a system, I mean, you'll have an understanding of like a Windows enterprise environment and things like that, but it's not hands on, so it's not as many transferable skills.
So would you say some people like say GRC is like talking about cyber security, and then pen testing or SOC analyst is like doing cyber security? Would you say that's pretty accurate?
I would say somewhat, yes. It really depends, because GRC in many businesses can mean so many different things. In our team, we kind of absorb all of the work that any other team doesn't want to do. We do very detailed risk assessments of, looking at architectures of an entire environment, looking at information flows and determining, what are the risks that exist in the system. But yes, we may do that discovery through interviews, or, getting someone to share their screen and showing us a configuration. So in that regard, talking about it, yes. But it's not like we're just having conversations about things and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and going to that point about moving, like pivoting within domains in cybersecurity, I've noticed like a lot of people on your team are quite interested in getting into pen testing,
Yeah.
but I think most of them are pretty early in their careers. Is
Mm.
that accurate?
Yeah, so we did have one person in our team who was with us for about, I think, 9 months, and then they wanted to be a tester. And I said to them, yeah, absolutely, give it a crack. You know what I mean? If you don't like it, you can come back. So the way that I see it is that, at the end of the day, what you have an idea of in your head of what you want to do in your role, before you start actually on your journey into security, when you finish your education and when you start your role, you can change so much in that journey. Like, I wanted to do counter fraud, then I wanted to do digital forensics, and now I'm doing GRC. And that's the same for a lot of people. This person in particular, they did medical science, and then they did cybersecurity, and then they did GRC, and then they did pen testing. So I think you'll learn more in your first 6 months of any security role and get exposed to every other type of function of cybersecurity in that first 6 months, that you may find yourself gravitating to a different area. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really random. Like people just
Mm.
jump around a bit, and people who get into cyber, their backgrounds are so diverse,
Extremely diverse. Yeah.
extremely diverse. Yeah, yeah.